Hello everybody and welcome to the Managing ADHD Symptoms webinar. This is an on-demand presentation and it's brought to you by the Norfolk and Suffolk Wellbeing and Talking Therapy Services. What is this about? So really it's for anyone. It's for anybody who would like to know more information about ADHD and how to manage those, whether that is that you have the diagnosis yourself, if you know somebody who maybe has a diagnosis or symptoms, if you can relate to some of the traits and you want to know if it's something that you could be having or experiencing. We've had teachers who've come on who want to know about their learners. It really is for anyone a general kind of overview of what ADHD is and how to manage these symptoms. The best thing about it being on demand is that you can pause it. So we know that an hour long can feel quite a long time, especially if we're not completely kind of engaged and focused at times. So you can pause it and return to it later. Also, we'll let you know when to pause it because we might give you some times to reflect on how you could use these tools and techniques in your life. But also times to reflect on, can I relate to this? Is this something that I experience? So please do pause that. If we do ask to pause though, I would recommend pausing it as quickly as possible because we will then continue with the rest of that. So I don't want you to get kind of caught up. So please make sure you're poised and ready for that pause. If you're somebody like my colleague here who likes to speed up playbacks when you're watching things, you'll see at the bottom right hand corner there'll be a setting button. It looks a bit like a cog or a wheel. If you click on that, you can then change the playback speed to whatever suits you really. So as we've said, welcome. My name is Rebecca and I am a psychological wellbeing practitioner. So what that job title means is just that I've had specific training to be able to work with common mental health difficulties. And these can be things over a range of things like low mood, anxiety, panic, etc.
And I'm Jess and I have exactly the same role as Becky. I'm also a psychological wellbeing practitioner, or PWP, to make it a bit easier.
Absolutely. So what are we going to be covering today? Well, we're going to be looking at some common symptoms of ADHD. We're also going to be looking at what is CBT. We're also going to look at your tips for managing ADHD symptoms that can be linked to some of these CBT type techniques. And we're also going to signpost to some other helpful resources. At that point, I think it's really important just to kind of explain that in this service, we are not specialists of ADHD. However, we are aware, and we will go into more detail actually around how ADHD can be linked to kind of mental health difficulties and how that can then, the tools can help with all of it as a kind of broader support. So these are the things that we're covering and we'll give you the kind of more specialist services at that point.
And just to mention a little bit about your safety before we get into the session today, if you've done any of these workshops with us before, you'll know that this is important for us to kind of cover first. It's not uncommon when we are going through a tough time with our mental health to have thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore or perhaps wanting to hurt ourselves. If you're noticing that you're getting those thoughts and you'd like some support with that, then please do reach out to these services on the screen here. Within the wellbeing service and the talking therapy services, we're not a crisis service, so we can't provide that kind of immediate 24/7 support. But the places you can go on the screen here are the NHS 111. Option 2 is a mental health line, and that's 24/7 for everybody in Norfolk and Suffolk. You've got the fantastic charity The Samaritans on 116123. You can email them as well. There is a text service if you're not comfortable talking over the phone kind of verbally. You can text a service called Shout, and you literally text the word shout to 85258 and that will then connect you with somebody via text. You can go to your GP, and if you're concerned about a child, then the number is Childline. All of these services are on Google, and there's lots of other ones out there as well, so please do make use of those if you need them. So what is ADHD? It's worth spending a bit of time now maybe thinking what your definition might be, because everybody's different, aren't they? Anybody kind of diagnosed or who perceives themselves to have ADHD, we all have our own personal experiences, so it's going to be different how we experience it, but think about what your definition might be and what the symptoms might be. So we know that ADHD is a natural diversity in neurocognitive capability, which is a bit of a mouthful, so let's break that down. So natural means that it's something that's naturally occurring. We're born with that neurological difference, so it's natural. 1 in 20 people, we estimate around that, will experience ADHD, will live with ADHD. Diversity means difference, and neurocognitive capability is basically your neurons, they're what kind of fire messages in your brain, so it's a way of thinking and a way of processing information. So a natural difference in how we think and process and take in information. Now the key part of the brain that we want to focus on with ADHD is executive function. Now, you might have heard of this. It's the part of the brain that's involved in planning, focusing, organising, remembering, kind of self-regulation, monitoring our own behaviour, planning, all those kind of things. That's the area of the brain that we notice has some challenges when it comes to ADHD. We'll get into what that kind of leads to in terms of kind of traits and symptoms. But ADHD kind of covers, I suppose, there's two kind of subtypes in there, but we look at it in terms of three kind of key areas. So it's inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll look a little bit first at inattention. I was hoping that would come up on the slide, but it hasn't. So we'll go through each of these symptoms then, or traits, first of all. So distractibility. That's when we are perhaps more easily distracted than a neurotypical person, and that can be distracted by external things. So that might be sounds in our environment, that might be somebody clicking away with their pen or typing in the office, or it might be internal distractions like our racing thoughts. Time management is another big part of inattention. So it's that difficulty managing time, and we often refer to time blindness, which is the idea that it's hard to kind of perceive time, estimate time, manage time, and that can lead to a lot of difficulties that you often talk about that.
Absolutely. So for some people, it's not only that kind of thinking, how long will something take me? It can also be if we've got something planned, say in the evening, so we're going out with our friends at 7 p.m. For some people with ADHD, then that kind of hyper focus of I have to make sure that I'm ready and that I'm going to be on time because I can't be late because I told my friends I'll be there. Some people can really struggle to do anything else in that day because they're really concerned that they're not going to make it, really kind of focusing on that time management. So then they feel like they're spending their day waiting for that so they don't get distracted. So that's another difficulty with time that's quite common with people with ADHD.
That kind of waiting mode. Yeah. And then we've got next, struggling to maintain focus, which is an interesting one because there's certainly challenges with focus, and often it's this idea that with ADHD it's hard to kind of filter out everything that's going on. So we're actually kind of trying to focus on everything all the time, and because of that it can be really difficult to kind of maintain focus on one thing or shift focus from something that's interesting to something perhaps that's not. And equally, we can sometimes see this hyper focus. So there's certain things that we might not be able to focus on, but other things that we hyper focus on at the kind of expense of everything else. A lot of the symptoms or traits or experiences of ADHD can lead us to make mistakes, sort of what we say kind of small mistakes, oversights, and that can affect us at work. And it's all to do with this executive function and the challenges that we have there. And working memory is a big part of that, so it's remembering to do things, it's missing things sometimes, and equally kind of inattention can involve finding it hard to kind of listen and kind of follow steps and instructions. So these can all have a really big impact, and the workplace obviously is mentioned here as one of those. So yes, this is inattention.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we now have a look at some symptoms around kind of that more hyperactivity or impulsivity, some people may experience feeling restless or feeling on the go. If we're trying to relax, we're sitting there, we're constantly having to fidget, our legs shaking. Even when we're trying to not do anything, we still can't help but feel restless. Some people always feel like as well, what is sitting down? What is relaxing? I can't do that. I need to keep burning this energy off. So it's constantly on the go, trying to do several things at once. So that's a really kind of common symptom if someone's having hyperactivity or impulsivity type. We've also got talking excessively. So for many people with ADHD, especially in that more kind of hyperactive bracket, kind of talking a lot, especially with something that they're passionate about, not really letting people get a word in. Social cues are kind of out the window at that point because we're talking excessively. We want to get everything out and we want to keep talking about it. And then on that kind of flip side as well, and that kind of impulsivity, and people can have both of these, is where it's that kind of interrupting people without meaning to. So maybe it's because we've got something to say and you don't want to forget it, so you need to quickly say it, or because you're very passionate or excited about what's being said, so you want to have an interject and be part of that, without realising that perhaps you've probably interrupted someone there mid-flow, and can be quite upsetting for some people, but it's unintentional. We just want to kind of get involved in that social aspect. We've also got on here trouble turn taking. So that can be part of that kind of interrupting as well, where if, for example, we're in group work and everyone's having a go going round, it can be difficult to kind of sit there and have everyone listen because you want to, again, have that put as part of that impulsivity and hyperactivity. But it can be even things like games. Like, I know many people who have ADHD can struggle with games like Monopoly or Cluedo, where it's got to be in that turn taking. So it's like kind of sometimes wanting to get in there quicker and kind of miss that waiting part. And for some, it's around stimulation seeking. So it's kind of chasing that dopamine, chasing that adrenaline. For some, it can be doing, kind of silly sort of pranks or something, but constantly have to get that stimulation. And for some, it can be like skydiving, as we see there. It's that constant kind of seeking for that stimulation. Now, it's really important to say that actually many people with ADHD can identify with inattention and the hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms, and that is called comorbid. So it is common for many people. If you're sitting here now thinking, I can relate to both, it's very normal to be able to do so.
Lovely. What have we got next? Yeah, so as with any kind of, depending on how you want to describe it, mental health problem, disorder, condition, however you want to kind of label it, it varies in severity. So ADHD varies in severity. Somebody might have mild symptoms, somebody might have severe symptoms, or be somewhere kind of within that spectrum. And I think it's also important to point out that with many conditions, the traits that we might see in a diagnosis are normal human traits. You know, we're talking about normal things that lots of people experience. But with ADHD, it's then the extent to which they affect that person. It's to a kind of debilitating and consistent degree. In the same way that depression isn't just sadness, ADHD isn't just sometimes forgetting your keys. It has that kind of constant kind of impact. And again, as with anything, you know, we're multifaceted people, aren't we? We're not just our ADHD. And with an ADHD brain, you will have strengths in some areas and weaknesses in others. And sometimes people refer to their neurodivergent brain as a superpower. Other people really don't like that because of the challenges that they face every day. You know, some people say, well, my ADHD allows me to be curious, creative, really good in high stress, problem solver. I can do anything that somebody without ADHD can do, but there's a tax to it. Yeah, you know, there's additional effort that kind of comes from that.
Yeah. So you would have remembered at the beginning, I explained how we're not ADHD specialists within our service, but there is a link, and we know that of that link between kind of common mental health difficulties as well as ADHD. So this is where I'm going to start getting you to really think, and we'll have some pause opportunities here, because I'm going to give you a question that poses a statistic, and I would like you, when I say pause, to write down what you think that answer is, and then we'll go through it together. So we know that statistically people with ADHD can struggle with mood disorders such as depression more than somebody who perhaps doesn't have ADHD. So my first question for you is, how many times more likely is somebody with ADHD to experience mood disorders such as depression? Pause the video now and then write your answer on a bit of paper or on your phone that you've got with you. Lovely, so hopefully you've got your answer there. So what we do know is it's actually people with ADHD are 3 times more likely to experience mood disorders such as depression than somebody who doesn't have ADHD. Second one that I'm going to provide you is, how many times more likely do you think somebody with ADHD is to also experience generalised anxiety disorder symptoms? So pause the video and write down what you think. Perfect. Hopefully you've got your answer if you have written them down. So it is actually 4 times more likely. So somebody with ADHD is 4 times as likely to experience generalised anxiety disorder compared to someone who doesn't. Now, again, I'm going to invite you for another pause just to think, why? Why do we think that could be? So pause the video and give that a thought. Lovely. So there's many reasons, and actually there's so much research going on around ADHD and kind of where it comes from, the impact it has. But what we are noticing, and hopefully many of you kind of thought about this, is it's really because of how difficult it can be with these sort of challenges that we can face with ADHD to live in a neurotypical world, a society that is built a certain way, that expects people to be a certain way. And then when we're really actively having to consciously be considerate really of our difficulties and try to either mask or try to really better ourselves to make sure that people don't notice it, we can keep up with other people with ADHD. It's exhausting, isn't it? And like we talked about taxing, so of course it then can have that knock-on effect if we're not ensuring our well-being is being cared for at the same time. So yes, as we've mentioned, people with ADHD are more likely to experience problems with their mental health compared to someone who doesn't. Now, what we also know is that there is a greater likelihood of having neurodevelopmental disorders such as autism as well if you've got ADHD. Again, it's quite a broad percentage, but I'd like you to give me a range of that percentage of people who have ADHD may also have autism. So pause the video. Perfect. So as I said, it is quite a big range because there's a lot of research going on there. But what they're finding at the moment is that actually nearly 50 to 70% of adults with ADHD do actually also have autism. So we know that there can be, well, an association, a relationship, but also conflicting. If someone's got ADHD, it's quite a lot of conflicting symptoms there. So again, think about those challenges and why that could then impact our mental health in that long run.
Lovely. So what we've got on the slide here is kind of cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT, kind of explained. So we often look at kind of cycles when it comes to cognitive behavioural therapy, and it's the main approach that we use within the talking therapy service. And it looks at how our thoughts, our feelings and our behaviours all interact. And through CBT, we work on kind of changing our thought patterns, changing our behavioural patterns to improve how we feel. So today we're going to kind of use that as a framework. In this video, we're going to look at, first of all, some behavioural techniques to help manage ADHD traits, and then we're going to look at some kind of thought-based techniques as well. So that's the structure of the next part of the session. So first of all then, we're going to look into our behavioural coping strategies. Now, again, lots of these things you might already know. For some of them, you might think, yeah, that's a bit of me. Others, that's not going to work for me. And that's absolutely fine, because we've said, haven't we, we're all different, multifaceted people with all different experiences. But I would say try stuff. You know, try stuff. Don't knock it until you haven't given it a try. But for you, you might think, no, this isn't for me, but actually this is. So we're going to, touch on a few kind of variety of some techniques, rather, that hopefully will be useful for you. So overall then, in terms of behaviours, we're going to go through, I suppose, a few kind of tips that I think these ones mainly you probably will know, but we'll go through them in a bit more detail. So first of all, it's breaking tasks down into smaller chunks. So imagining, you know, on the Bake Off, you know, when they get that task where Becky's thinking she's going off, where they get it's the blind bake, where they're told to just make a pancake or whatever it might be. And there isn't the steps in the instructions, and it's really overwhelming for people. So we kind of want to picture our life like that. We want to actually break things down into a recipe, create a recipe of small chunks of tasks to make it easier, because often the reason that we put off an activity or we procrastinate from doing a task is because it feels too big, it feels like it's going to go on for too long, or it's difficult, or it's boring, and that can make it very overwhelming. Hopefully that analogy makes some sense. So what we can do is break it down, create a bit of a tick list. And what happens when we tick something off our list? We get a bit of a boost, we get a bit of a kind of dopamine, and it makes us then feel motivated. And there's lots of online tools you can use. You know, if you think, actually, where do I even get started with breaking things down? Online, there's all sorts of tools that you can use. There's goblin tools on there that you can look at, and that does break things down for you. But the example, I don't know, might be there's a room in the house that you've got to clean, perhaps it's your bedroom, and you might start breaking that down and go, first step, I'm going to put all of the rubbish that's for the bin in a pile. Then I'm going to put all of the clothes for the wash bin in a pile. Then all of the clean clothes in a pile. And really step by step ticking that off makes it easier. Next step we've got here then is defining the task in realistic, actionable steps. So I don't know for you, if you kind of reflect on yourself, how often when you are feeling a bit more motivated and a bit more kind of engaged in something, that you may set yourself kind of an unrealistic goal of today, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to do this, and then we burn out.
Because I feel really good, I can do everything,
yes,
that sort of thing.
Exactly, when we feel good, we take on lots. But it's recognising that that can then lead to burnout. And equally, you know, with neurodiverse individuals, it can be hard to kind of recognise how we feel. So it's hard to know, isn't it, when something's too much, and equally how long something's going to take, as we said about that time blindness. So it can actually sometimes be about trial and error. You know, okay, so how long does it take me to unload the dishwasher? Is it realistic to fit that in then? And it's timing ourselves and then putting that into a plan. And pre-planning, it is key, pre-planning those breaks to kind of refuel, because neurodiverse individuals often have a smaller energy tank. We have to kind of admit that and accept that, that we need those breaks.
And if our traits are saying on the go, let's go, and we're not thinking about it and not pre-planning it, where are we going to fit them in?
Exactly. That then brings us on to planning, and you've probably seen this on the screen and thought, plans, routines, ugh, gross. And that's so often what we hear with ADHD. People don't like that idea of having a plan because we crave novelty. We want things to be new. We want things to be exciting. And then a plan can kind of take that away. But there's a really, really big benefit of having a plan, and it takes that load away from our executive function, that kind of decision making. It reduces that demand. So then we've got more energy for other things. And that, you know, when it comes to a plan, it could be just planning out the clothes you're going to wear for the week. That's a little bit of executive load taken off. Meal planning, a little bit of executive load taken off. And again, all these things do sound easier said than done, and we'll get into kind of ways to, I suppose, activate that. But this is just some general ideas. Pivot point. I was just looking at my notes there, sorry guys. Anyone know what we mean by a pivot point? A bit of a thing. It's not in netball when you're pivoting. It's kind of the kind of sweet spot, I suppose, when we move from being kind of understimulated, undermotivated, to then being kind of motivated and focused. And often what we do, I don't know if this sounds like you or people you know, but we say, I'll wait until I feel like doing that.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait until I feel motivated or until I feel confident to do that thing. But the trouble with that is, especially if we have kind of low mood and depression as well as living with ADHD, is if we wait until we feel like doing something, we're probably never going to do it. If I waited till I felt like taking the bins out, my bins would never go out. So it's that idea that we kind of need to act first, and then that feeling of motivation will follow. Because if we wait until we feel like it, it's like putting the cart before the horse. It's not going to go anywhere. So yeah, action breeds action, energy breeds energy. We've got to kind of start first, and then those feelings follow. And it's working out for you as an individual. Where is my pivot point? How long does it take me to then feel motivated? Do I need music to do that? Or what is it that I need to get to my pivot point? So some of these things are probably very obvious to you, but we're going to get into more detail of how to kind of start doing them before we move on. You ready to? Yeah. Okay. So distraction, we've spoken about, haven't we? And this idea of inattention, we can be easily distracted by external and internal stimuli. So let's look at how to kind of reduce that distraction in different ways. So first of all, we've got a picture of a desk here. Looks a bit like my desk. We want to kind of declutter and prepare only what's needed for that task, because otherwise we're then, oh, what's that? Or maybe I'll crack on with that. And we're not focused on that main thing we're doing. So having only the things around us that we need can be really useful. How about our phones? Just looking for mine then. How do people feel about their phones? How do people feel that they can disengage from their phones? Do they not realise, and next thing you know, you're scrolling down social media? And that's because our phones are this giant dopamine machine. Their job is to kind of get you hooked and get you focused on that. So it can be really, really difficult when we want to focus, when we want to pay attention to something. Our phone can really take that away, because that muscle memory, we're just reaching for our phone without knowing.
And that's what the Reels and TikToks are actually designed for, is that 30-second kind of dopamine hit stimulation, then you want to keep going. It's only 30 seconds, only 2 more videos, because it won't take long. 2 hours later, you're still going. It's designed to have that addictive mentality.
Yeah, that's its job.
Yeah.
So there's things we can do around that work for us. It might not be something we want to do, but again, we might need to. Some people get like lock boxes for their phones. They might put it on do not disturb mode or kind of grayscale mode, so it's not as exciting or interesting to look at. But there's all sorts that we can do there.
I often sometimes will put like a 10-minute timer on. So if I'm doing a task, put 10-minute timer on, put it away, and then another 10-minute timer. So I'll do the task 10 minutes, go back to my phone, have my phone then for 10 minutes. When that 10 minutes up, go back. So also do that. Use timers to go on your phone. Put boundaries in place of your use, but don't feel like you're taking it away, where then all you're going to do is think about it.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. And there's a picture there of headphones on the screen. So some people find noise cancelling headphones really useful for blocking out those external distractions, but music as well can be used, can't it? Or sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been doing this webinar for a while actually, and many people bring in so many different examples. So some people would like nature sounds like ocean and the forest. Some people like EDM. Some people like drum and bass, heavy metal. Different sounds for different people can cause that kind of concentration. Some it's more that kind of brown noise, which is meant to be kind of really positive. I read one as well about something about this like house music, scatter house, I think it's called. I found out that that's meant to be amazing for that. Again, it's that kind of beat, isn't it, per minute? So yeah, there's so many different sounds that people find useful, and we also stop here and say it doesn't just have to be sounds. It can be all of our senses. We all have different sensitivities. We all have different things that can make us feel calm. And for myself, I have to have the smell of pomegranate. If I have a candle or one of those reed diffusers of pomegranate, I will be focused. It helps me concentrate. And where lavender does the opposite to me, I can't bear it. And we were talking about this, don't we? Because some people love lavender and that's calming for them. So think about your senses in your environment. Is the sounds okay? Do you need certain music or even silence? Have you got appropriate smells around you that help you feel concentrating? Some people like to have comfort touches. So whether that is a fidget toy where they can just keep fidgeting, or some people like crushed velvet or like teddy feels. So having something in your pocket or with you to touch. Taste can be one. Some people always have to have kind of like a chewing gum or something in their mouth to help them concentrate. Think about you and your senses. What helps you sensory kind of engage and focus in what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And body doubling is a really nice one that we talk about a lot, because it's that idea of holding ourselves accountable. So if we struggle because there's no kind of consequence for not getting a task done, if we body double, that means that you're in the same space or virtually in the same space with someone doing a task at the same time. You're basically doing a task. So Becky and I both have some paperwork to do that we don't want to do. We'll FaceTime each other and get that done for that period of time. And then we reward each other afterwards. You congratulate each other afterwards. You can create groups for that, can't you? Little WhatsApp groups where you kind of body double.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So you're probably thinking, yeah, all of that is great. I know all those things, they're obvious, but how do I get started? And this is the big thing, isn't it, with ADHD, motivation. Whenever we ask people about motivation, they're like, what motivation?
Yeah.
You know, it's very variable kind of levels of motivation. And it's not a case of not wanting to do something. You know, often people say to me, I love it when my house is sparkling clean, but I just can't kind of activate myself to do that. There feels like this a block when it comes to initiating action. We can feel kind of immobilized. And that's all to do with our brain. And it's believed it's to do with ADHDers having an underactive reward system in the brain. So this is all to do with dopamine. It's the idea that if you are a neurodiverse individual with ADHD, you probably require a bit more stimulation. Something needs to be more stimulating in order to be motivated and to focus on it than somebody who's neurotypical. And that can be really confusing and frustrating, can't it? That kind of, I suppose, distinction between wanting to do something and actually physically being able to enact that thing. And that can lead us to kind of judge ourselves, or others to go, well, you obviously don't care, or you're lazy. And there can be lots of criticism that comes from that. But it's not, if it was a case of willpower or wanting to do it, everything would be done, wouldn't it? But it's all to do with the brain and the reward system. So I suppose this is looking at, okay, how can we activate that reward system? How can we create motivation for an ADHD brain? So the main three ways we're going to look at today is urgency, novelty, and interest. Three key ways to activate motivation. So looking at urgency first, we can set reminders, we can use alarms, we can use post-it notes. Anything that gives a sense of urgency. So this means it makes it feel like it's now, it's needed, it's necessary. Because we've said, haven't we, with time blindness, with an ADHD brain, it feels like it's now or not at all.
Yeah.
So how can we make that thing feel like it's now, like it's urgent, like it's needed? Reminders can pop up, alarms can pop up, post-it notes as we leave the door. Something physically, you know, your lunchbox is there, so you trip over it when you go to leave.
Yeah.
So it's an urgent reminder. What else have we got? So time limits. This is often, I think, in the scientific terms called time boxing. And it's the idea that we set a length of time to do something so it makes it feel urgent. If you go, I've only got 10 minutes to get this thing done, it feels urgent. But there's other techniques you can use. Some people use the Pomodoro technique, which is the idea that we actively focus for 25 minutes, have a 5-minute break, and repeat that for kind of 3 cycles before we take a bigger break, because it allows that kind of chunk of focus.
Yeah. And you can kind of bring them to the reminders, can't you? Of if you then worry, because I know a few people have said to us, but when I get into it, I won't be able to stop. Use that timer, set that 25-minute timer, and then that 5-10 minute break, and then go back on that 25 minutes. So timers are so good, so good.
And work with your own brain. Know yourself. When is my time of the day when I am most efficient? You know, what works for me? Am I a night owl? Am I an early bird? And it's working that out around you and when would be the best time to kind of do that work. Creating deadlines. So we know, don't we, lots of us with ADHD, if there's a kind of exam tomorrow, we'll cram the kind of night before because it feels urgent. Create those deadlines for yourself. Create fake deadlines, but get somebody to hold you accountable. Yeah. So put that date in the diary and ask a friend to call you and text you to make sure you've done that thing on that day.
Yeah.
5-minute rule is another great one where we under promise and over deliver. So we'll say to ourselves, I'm just going to do the washing up for 5 minutes. or I'm just going to clean the bathroom for 5 minutes. I don't know why mine are all cleaning based, but it can apply to anything because it allows us to, again, it breaks that task down. It doesn't feel too big, it doesn't feel too overwhelming. And usually after that 5 minutes, we get to that pivot point where actually we think, I could do another 5 and keep going.
Because kind of retrospect, it doesn't feel like a lot of time, does it, if we think about 5 minutes? But actually, if you think about it, if you're standing there at your washing machine and your laundry basket's in the next room, 5 minutes, you're easily gone and got the clothes, got in there, put the clothes in the washer. They're not all in. You're going to be halfway. You're not going to just drop it, are you? You're going to want to continue that. So can be quite a productive amount of time, that 5 minutes.
Yeah, especially because we're not procrastinating with it. We're going now.
Yeah.
And that, I suppose, kind of brings us on to the 5-second rule, which is the idea that at the moment something crosses your mind, so you might be kind of scrolling on social media, you think, oh, I forgot to text that friend back. As it crosses your mind, you count down from 5 and you do it there and then. For some people this doesn't work, for other people again it does, but it means we've got less time to think and the less time to go, oh, it'll be difficult, it'll be boring, we're more likely to do it. And the science behind this is it kind of prevents that thing being transferred from your short-term working memory to your long-term memory, where you're more likely to not think about it. We often have those challenges with short-term memory, retaining something in the here and now.
I think that's quite interesting because your example of texting a friend, I really struggle with that, right? So I'm that person, if you message, it's 3 to 5 business days until you get a reply. And it'll be random times where I think I haven't replied to them, but it'll be when I'm at work and I can't do it then, or you're in the shower and you think, oh, I can't get my phone now. So what's quite interesting is, I guess if that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you could write it down somewhere on your phone, set that timer so as soon as you're finished that work day, or 5 minutes after your shower, that will go off, then you can then do that 5 second again. But that's quite interesting.
That's
I like
nice,
that well.
because that then helps with, I think, impulsivity as well, if we don't actually want to do it right there and then. Yeah, nice. So the next thing we've said is novelty. So this means something needs to be new. It needs to be exciting for us to feel motivated. And I've said, haven't I, about plans and how important they are, and there's I don't know if people have heard of Dr. Minna. She's an amazing ADHDer who's also, I think, a clinical psychologist, and she says her plans are so vital. She has to have that plan, otherwise she doesn't feel good and her ADHD brain doesn't kind of work right. But if you think, no, that's too boring for me, you can make micro changes to that routine. So that might be kind of, keeping things fresh with really tiny changes. So having maybe a planner for, a weekly planner that you rotate. 1 week it's this, 1 week it's that. Changing the colour of that planner sounds silly, but it feels a little bit fresher for us. Or moving where we do our activity. So if usually you go for a run at the gym, it's going for a run outdoors. Or a different time of day that you do something, or even like your surroundings. Moving some pictures around or your furniture around can make things feel fresh. If you're working, switching up your position instead of sitting, perhaps standing. And you speak about with plans as well, you can have like slots for things.
Yeah, so we know that some people with ADHD, they might plan that week, I've really got into cross stitch. I'm going to make sure that I do half an hour self-care doing cross stitch. But by that time, that might have been and gone. That hobby's gone. There's a different type of hobby or a different new adventure that you want to do. So I personally can experience that. I can get bored very quickly. So what I do is I actually schedule pleasurable tasks. And whether that is cross stitch, playing video games, playing an instrument, whatever it is, drawing, colouring, whatever your hobby is, then when it gets to that point, whatever it is, you put that out. So you can then do your kind of self-care pleasurable activity. Same with housework. Sometimes things like hoovering can feel really demanding, but actually I probably could wipe down the kitchen sides. So I put on there housework task, and then I would just make sure I do whichever one needed doing and I felt more up to doing. Because it can change and priorities change as well, don't they, of course. So yeah, maybe just schedule out the type of activity, but leave it open, but still stick to it, still do something for that, but don't be so specific if you're someone who can change on that.
And then there's still structure, which is powerful for that kind of overload, but there's a flexibility in the structure, and that helps, I think, with demand avoidance as well. When we don't like doing things strictly when we're told to, it allows that flexibility there. If we've got kind of a list of things, a menu of things that we can put into that plan,
still have an element of control in that moment.
Yes, good point. So another kind of novelty element is finding maybe a new way to complete the same task. So, folding the washing, it's boring. How about, I looked the other day, there's Mary Kondo, isn't it, that does all this housework stuff. But there's all sorts of, on YouTube, if you have a look, ways to fold your washing. Bear with me on this. So you can get a piece of cardboard, and there's certain ways that you cut it, and then it creates this really cool tool for folding your clothes. A new exciting way to do it. Or perhaps you're bored of brushing your teeth, it's something you've got to do. Try different flavoured toothpaste. So maybe have 3 options of toothpaste and you rotate them, because it's then those different options make it exciting, they make it new. What else have we got? So gamifying the task. This is one Becky loves, creating a game out of a task that we don't want to do. How might you normally do that?
So Jess brought it up a long time ago and I just loved it. And I think especially if you're living with family as well. So it's about the idea of, if you've got a task to do, make it into a competition or a game. So whether it's with yourself, so remember you mentioning how you might be boiling an egg, for example. You know, you've got 10 minutes, depending on how you like your egg. And then you think, okay, in this 10 minutes, I've got to go up and make my bed and do X, Y, Z, and then come down before that timer's up. So that's a good idea. But also, if you've got a family and there's, you know, it's like plates and cups everywhere, no one brings their washing up down, do they? Make it a game of who can go around and collect the most. And so it's a competition. And I don't know about you, but I like to win everything. So I better find all the plates and the cups that the family haven't brought down. And again, it brings everyone in, so you're getting support. It's partly body doubling because you're doing it with somebody. But also it's a fun way for you to also kind of get engaged with it. So yeah, I thought it was a brilliant thing that you brought to us.
Love it. Sensory considerations, well, we've kind of already touched on this, haven't we? But having those kind of markers to make things new. So having a different candle on to make it more exciting, wearing a different kind of scent on ourselves, it marks out a kind of change in activity. And yeah, just makes things a bit more new and exciting.
Think about it, like I know when I'm working, I'll look at some outfits and I'll think, I'm not going to focus on that. Like, that's not comfortable enough. I need a certain fabric, I need a certain type fit that day. So consider that. You don't want to sit there if you're feeling quite, you know, uncomfortable or a bit stressed in tight jeans, do you? You want to be comfortable. So even things like that, sensory.
And equally, like the same with me, if I'm working from home, I will still want to wear something that feels smart because then I'm in the zone of work.
So yeah,
definitely. Okay, so interest is the last kind of the three main ways that we can stimulate that kind of motivation and switch on, that kind of activate ourselves. So interest is basically, it's got to be interesting to you. You know, how can you make it valuable and interesting to you? Well, connect it with your values. Think, what is important to me as an individual? What do I value? And there's different ways you can figure this out. There's kind of a values wheel that lots of people use, and you can rate kind of the areas of your life and what's most valuable, what's most important, or what you kind of want to improve on. Equally, if you Google, there's lots of values lists out there with different things like, I don't know, adventure, excitement. I'm trying to think of all the kind of ADHD kind of ones there. Helping others, creativity, all of those things. But it's thinking about things that you have to do that perhaps you don't want to do, but how can you make them align to your values? So if my value is fun, but I want to make sure I'm getting to sleep at night, I'll go, right, I'm going to focus on my hour wind down routine before bed. And the reason for that is because it aligns with my values, so I'll have more energy for all the fun and adventures that I'm doing the next day. So it's kind of, I suppose, twisting our perspective a little bit on it, isn't it? So another way we can kind of look at our interests is, again, looking at our perspective. So we have to-do lists, and often we've said this, haven't we? We might over-plan and think, I've got to do this and this and this and this, because our brain's always thinking about what's next. And then we feel a bit rubbish at the end of the day because we've not completed everything on the to-do list. So we can flip that on its head and we can create what we call a done list. So all the things we've actually done in that day, which we're then going to say, oh, brilliant, you know, that kind of motivates us. And stuff we wouldn't realise normally that we're doing. But also, in terms of our interests, is a why list. Why do I want to do that thing? So I'm going to exercise in the morning even though I don't want to, because it gives me energy and it gives me focus. I'm going to clean the bathroom because I value my family and I don't want them, you know, I want them to have a good day and I want them to be around a clean space. Or I'm going to do the washing up because I've got that really cool new mug that I want to use tomorrow for my coffee. I think that, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I think that's brilliant.
What else have we got? So in terms of interest, again, it's looking at other kind of habits, other things that we're interested in. So matching up what we're doing with our hobbies. So maybe listening to a very interesting podcast while we do something. Or if there's something we know that we're definitely doing already as part of a routine. So we always boil the kettle and make a cup of tea. What can we stack with that? So could I stack, I'm going to do some of the stretches that the chiropractor told me to do that I never do while the kettle's boiling. Or as you said, run up and make the bed while the kettle's boiling. And it's kind of, matching, stacking something you're definitely already doing with something new that you want to kind of embed into your routine. There's a great book on this. It's called Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, and it really explains this well. A lot of ADHDers I talk to find that really useful. And then I think the last one on interest is movement. And I think it's not an idea of exercise. It's not having to go for a run or go to the gym, but we know, scientifically speaking, when we move our body, it provokes changes in the brain structure and brain chemicals that allows our neurons to fire better and allows that kind of brain fog to reduce. All those kind of ADHD traits are managed better. It's kind of one of the best treatments for ADHD. Oh, there's another one. reward breaks. Becky's already spoken about this a little bit. So it's, you know, having that time to focus, but then also having that reward, whether it is scrolling on your phone, whether it is reading a book, whether it is going to hug your pet or whatever it might be.
Having your favourite snack, Kinder Bueno.
Exactly.
That's the
Kinder
best reward
Bueno.
for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Jess, for going through some behavioural coping strategies. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to go through with you some cognitive coping strategies. We know that, yes, we can struggle with some behavioural elements, but actually our thoughts about ourselves and our situations can also be as difficult and as impacting. We are going to be going through some examples of unhelpful thoughts or negative automatic thoughts is what we call them. So please be mindful. On the next slide there will be some might be a bit upsetting if they are something you can relate to. Again, be kind to yourself. If you want to view it, you can. If you want to pause it or just fast forward past that part where we actually talk about how to manage it, do what you need to do. So what we're going to do is going to look at some cognitive coping strategies. Now, as I mentioned, they're called unhelpful thoughts, and we also call them negative automatic thoughts, and we shorten them to gnats, because like a gnat in the summer, it will just keep coming back and biting you, no matter how many times you swat it. Now, they are often mostly emotional responses to things. They are near enough always negative about yourself or situations around you. And they're automatic. We don't invite them in. We don't say, please make me feel rubbish about myself. They come in intrusively, can be fleeting, sometimes stay with us. It's really an inner bully. We know our biggest insecurity and vulnerability, so these will target those. Now, some examples that we'll see for someone who's experiencing low mood, but also ADHD, these can be things such as, I'm useless, I'm an idiot, I'm lazy, which actually is probably, arguably, one of the most common we experience if someone's got ADHD. People are telling me lazy because I can't do it, but actually we've got that ADHD paralysis where we really want to do something, but we're really struggling to do it. Or perhaps you've set yourself a big list to do and you haven't been able to achieve all of that for X, Y, Z reason. We hear this quite a lot. I'm hopeless, and also I'm not good enough. Now, all of these are really challenging thoughts, of course, and I'm sure that all of us can relate to them in some way. But how do we kind of approach those? How do we manage them if that's our inner dialogue a lot of the time? Oh, apologies, there was another one, which is I'm worthless. So what we say is we need to take these thoughts to court. Now, we know that a lot of it is opinion based when we're being harsh about ourselves, or depending on our perspective about ourselves or our situation. So of course it's important to acknowledge and kind of validate how we're feeling. You know, I am feeling this way and it's okay that I'm feeling this way because of this happened. But like a courtroom, we now want to move that emotional and that opinion based out of the courtroom, and we only want to focus on factual evidence. Okay, because for example, I always say if I had gone to court because someone had done a crime against me and I stood there and said, oh, I think it was them, not entirely sure, but they look like they'd do it. Yeah, the judge would say, well, that doesn't count, take it out of the courtroom, because it's not 100% factual evidence. So that's why we need to really, and even this is the only thing you take away from me today, that thoughts are not always, you know, they've got to have factual evidence. It's usually opinion. We don't want to have that opinion. We have to move that out. So what we do is we get a negative automatic thought. So for this example, the one that we're going to be using is the house is a mess and I'm lazy. One that I reckon we all probably have experienced at some point in our lives. So in this, what we're going to do is we're going to take that negative automatic thought or that unhelpful thought, and we're going to find that evidence for and against. Remember, it has to be fact. So I'm going to go through some examples, and I want you to think, is that factual evidence or is that an opinion? So the evidence for the house is a mess and I'm so lazy, we've got, I haven't done the washing up for 2 days. Pause the clip now and just think, is that factual evidence or is that opinion? Jess, what do you think? Do you think that's factual evidence or opinion?
I'd say that's a fact, because it's something that objectively both you and I can say, we can see the washing up's there, that's something that's happened.
Absolutely. So we would class that as a factual evidence, so we would keep that as part of that evidence for. Okay, next one then. My partner thinks I'm useless. Pause the clip and think, is that evidence or opinion? Jess, what do you think about this one?
Well, I'm thinking it's an opinion because we're saying my partner thinks I'm useless, and how do we know what they think?
Absolutely. It can be subjective, right? If we're struggling to do tasks and our partner and us in a really good mood, they're never going to say that to us. They're never going to think we're useless because we're in a really healthy part. But we know relationships come in waves. So if they're irritated over something, they might think we're useless because they're upset about something else. Because it's subjective and it's an opinion based, we would not count that as factual evidence. So we would throw that out the courtroom. It doesn't count. Okay. Third one then, the clothes are still on the dryer. Pause the video. Is that fact or opinion? Lovely. Jess, what about this one?
I'm going fact because again I can see the clothes, they're on the dryer.
Absolutely. So hopefully all of you also got those sort of similar answers. Remembering, we get rid of those opinion based. Now let's look at the other side then. So we're looking at evidence against. Apologies, because we're here, where we are here, we can't move the kind of statements over to the other side, but they are for the other side of that scale for evidence against. So the first one is, I've been busy with other things. Pause the video. Is that fact or opinion? Jess, what do you think?
Yeah, and I say again, we could objectively say, you know, if you've been busy, you've been doing things this week, and that's a fact.
Absolutely. What about, I need time to rest? Pause the video. Jess, what do you think?
I mean, again, lots of these things you can go into more detail, can't you, and figure out, is this something that's objectively factual? We can get quite philosophical with it, but I think we've said, haven't we, all humans need rest, especially if we have a smaller gas tank. Yeah. So I'd say, yeah.
And exactly like Jess has just done there, if we're sitting on the fence with it and we think, well, part of that is opinion, I believe, and part of it can be factual evidence, dig. What is the factual evidence? Why do we need time to rest? So sometimes it's just delving in that little bit more, because we do know humans need rest. We do know the rest, the self-care is important to rejuvenate our energy to be able to do the routine and necessary tasks. Okay, well then we've got, I cleaned the kitchen last week, so pause the video. Lovely. And I'm sure Jess would agree, similar to what we have said on the other side, we would know if we've done that. We factually will know there'll be evidence if we have cleaned that kitchen. So that is factual. Last one is, I don't have to do everything at once. Pause the video. Jess, what do you think about this one?
Well, this is hard, isn't it? Because if we have that time blindness and it feels like everything has to be now or not at all, it can kind of feel like we have to do everything at once because we might forget or we might miss it. But I suppose if we're speaking in practical terms, we don't have to. That is a fact.
And we know factually that if we are trying to do everything at once, often the things won't get done. We'll get burnt out. We then can't do the things we planned for the other days because we're burnt out. So again, of course, that would be factual. Lovely. Hopefully that was okay. And remember, if it is one that's in the middle, a little bit of a kind of grey area, just delve further. Try and find that factual evidence. So once we've done the first step of identifying the negative thought, which is in this case, the house is a mess and I'm so lazy, and we've completed the second step of finding all of the factual evidence for and against, we now will do the third and final step, which is revising that thought. So for this, what we do to make this alternative thought and to revise the thought is we actually collate the evidence for that we've just found and we collate the evidence against that we've just found and combine it to make an alternative thought. So what we can say is, I know some domestic tasks are unfinished. Okay. However, I can't do everything and need time to recharge. Once I have had a rest, I will start by placing clothes in the dryer. So again, we started off with my house a mess and I'm so lazy. Now into this thought. Can we see the difference there? We can absolutely debate that I'm so lazy. We have done finding that evidence for and against because that was opinion-based thought. But if we look at this thought, can we debate that? Probably not. There's factual evidence there, isn't it? We can't debate the evidence that's in front. Now, it's important to state with this technique, it isn't to make negative thoughts positive because life isn't roses and tinted glasses. But what it's saying is we can emotionally take it out on ourselves. We can be our inner bully. Let's remove that opinion and emotional, look at that evidence for and against that rationale and have a more balanced view. Okay.
And this is also important when it comes to motivation because we know that humans aren't motivated by punishment. You know, we're motivated by a reward. So if we're feeling more positive, we're going to be more motivated as well. So it links to that, doesn't it? Our thoughts are very powerful. They directly affect our mood and our emotions, which then affects our behaviour. So if we kind of keep practicing noticing a thought, is that a fair thought? Is that factual? Or is it kind of a distorted, kind of unkind thought?
Yeah.
can we then explore the evidence and come up with something more rational, more reasonable? And the more we do that, the easier it becomes.
I think that's a really good point, because we think about schools and teachers. If teachers were constantly saying to learners, you can't do it, you're stupid, for example, that learner's not going to want to keep bouncing back and trying to do that. Where more constructive feedback and some praise in there as well can absolutely make that difference. So we're thinking, if we're speaking more positively or balanced towards ourselves, it is more likely. Yeah, I really like that point. Thanks, Jess. So sometimes challenging these thoughts when we're finding evidence for and against can be quite tricky. So here are some thoughts that you can ask yourself when you're challenging them. So things like, well, what's the worst that could happen? That sometimes can put things into subjective. Will this matter in 5 years' time? There can be things that we worry about or we feel really negatively towards in that moment, but in 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, weeks, months, years, that might not be as important. And sometimes that can, again, look at that prioritization importance of that at that time. What would I say to a friend in this situation? I would never probably talk to Jess, I know I wouldn't. I would never talk to Jess how I would talk to myself in times that I'm annoyed at myself. So why do we allow ourselves to talk to ourselves like that? So it's really important sometimes, maybe think of yourself as that third person. Am I assuming my opinion is the only one possible? Which I think is quite interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes if we ask other people, am I lazy? They can sometimes bring you the evidence as to why you're not. So some people find it useful to talk to other people when challenging their thoughts. Maybe it's only partially true. And am I thinking in all or nothing terms? Which again, that kind of what that alternative force stops us from doing, isn't it? Because it looks at the kind of advantages and disadvantages of that kind of thought and the evidence for and against. So then we're not just seeing it from that all or nothing terms, we are seeing it from all different aspects. So again, the one thing that I absolutely need you to take away from this is that thoughts are not facts. Actually, the negative automatic thoughts tend to be more opinion-based, and that's why we have to do this.
So a little, I suppose, add-on to this is, yes, we can challenge our thoughts, but sometimes we might be using a very unkind tone, or the way we're telling ourselves. We might go, oh, you're so stupid, you're not lazy, look, you've done all these things. And we're still being mean to ourselves. And there is a whole kind of school of therapy called compassion-focused therapy. And it is this idea that the way in which we approach ourselves and talk to ourselves has a huge impact. And it's not just the content of the words, but it's the way we say them. So we can also look at that, in addition, how we talk to ourselves. And, some of the things on the screen here you could explore, talking to yourself out loud. Some people find that useful. Standing in the mirror and saying the things that you don't have to say how great you are, but you can say the things you're kind of grateful for. And it's twisting it, isn't it? So if in the day we're judging ourselves for all the things we think we've done wrong, taking a bit of time out to notice what actually are my strengths.
Yeah.
What do I like about myself, or what do other people like about me? And it's, I suppose, just taking again a little bit of time to come up with a slight kind of alternative perspective. And I think with ADHD, making it kind of specific to that, it's normalizing and it's accepting those traits as part of your ADHD and part of who you are. It's not trying to kind of change those things. Some people like affirmations, saying those repetitive things. I believe in myself, I'm worthy, I can achieve things. But yeah, just an additional little element to add on to that thinking part.
And the next bit, self-care. We always say that some people are like, yeah, self-care, and some are like, oh, I don't like it. But what is self-care? That's quite a big question, isn't it? What is self-care? It's different for absolutely everybody. And actually, it's more around kind of having that self-awareness, giving yourself that time. We know that if we are struggling or things are building up, people will often say, well, I need to do all these routine tasks such as housework, and I've got those unnecessary tasks like paying bills and going to work. I can't fit it all in. I know, I'll just stop doing my leisure and my hobbies and self-care. But actually, it's just as important, because without that, we're not getting that time for that awareness, for that kind of refresh and rejuvenation of our energy. It can look very different for everyone. So for some people, it is movement and exercise. For some, it is journaling, gratitude journaling, and reflecting on how they're feeling. Some it's reading, having a bath. And if you're someone who goes, but I don't know what it is, or mine changes all the time, I get bored. Remember what we said earlier, look back at that values wheel. What matters to me? What is my current interest? Try those things. You don't have to plan for that specific self-care. Just put self-care hour in and choose when you're there. And I talk about the values wheel quite often, because I remember I thought, okay, I don't really know what I enjoy anymore. So about a year ago, I got a harmonica. I was terrible. Never asked me to play it again. But I knew then that wasn't my self-care. But then I thought, I love bath bombs. Can I make my own bath bombs? and I loved it, and that is now my self-care of making the bath bombs and using them. So think about things that you're interested in, use that values wheel, and look out where your self-care could be.
And it's not having those strict boundaries around it, is it? It's working with your brain and your ADHD. You know, if you're a person who can't sit and meditate, fine, maybe walking is your meditation. It's doing what works for you, it's working with your brain. And we'd say it's really important with ADHD, and we're going to get onto this in a minute around kind of breathing and relaxation, because often, you know, we've mentioned with that kind of impulsive element, hyperactive element, that we might always be kind of on the go, or equally we might seek out stress, because sometimes that's what motivates us. It activates our sympathetic nervous system, you know, the part of the fight flight response, and we like it because it motivates us, it stimulates us. But if we're in that position too much, we can kind of burn out, it can affect our immune system, it can affect our health. So actually thinking of things that activate the other part of our nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, and that could be colouring for you, it could be a walk, it could be a bath, you know, it really is what works for you. What is the thing that activates your parasympathetic nervous system?
So progressive muscle relaxation. What it is a kind of a breathing but also muscle relaxation technique, and the whole idea of it is kind of coming out of the mind, which for people with ADHD can be really hard because obviously it's often racing and we can't stop it, but it's an exercise to come out of your mind and into your body. So what it does is it basically gets you to isolate and focus on different areas of your body, tensing and untensing those muscles while practicing breathing techniques, and the whole idea of it really is exactly like it says here. It's about slowing down that mind and being in the present. And for many people say, well, I tried meditation, I've tried yoga, it doesn't work for me. And I was the same. And then when we actually practiced it with our colleagues who do it, which we'll talk about in a moment, I've never been so relaxed in my life. So it's really good to practice. It's really kind of recommended. We know that we are always on the go quite often if we've got ADHD. So it just gives us that release of tension, because we're on the go and we're tense. Doing this can really give us that moment of relaxation. So we do offer this actually similarly to this sort of webinar, called Relaxation Station. So if you go on our website and look where our webinars are, there'll be Relaxation Station. It's a bit different to this one in terms of design, because actually it isn't kind of a therapeutic kind of session in terms of telling you about this information. It's actually time for you. They'll go through the technique with you, they'll talk you through it, and for many people then with that recording, being able to listen to that at any time, listening to our colleagues telling you what to do. It's like your own little kind of self-care tape, if you like, that you can listen to.
And it's guided, isn't it? So there isn't that expectation of just relax. It's talking you through how to actually do that.
And their voices are very calm and very soothing. So I would definitely recommend looking there. So ultimately, really, what today's about is just to say that it's going to be different for everyone. It's going to be challenging. We know that. But actually, the important thing is to have multiple coping strategies at your disposal. We're not saying all of these things that we've talked about today are going to be perfect for you. A couple might be, well, you might sit there thinking, I've tried that, but I didn't do that specific thing. I'm going to now try that. Try these things and try and make sure you have those multiple coping strategies that are suited for you.
So we've got a few kind of frequently asked questions that come up sometimes when we do kind of live sessions around this. So we'll whiz through those now. We don't want to keep you for too long. Where do we want to start, Becky?
Yeah, so should we start with the how do I stop once I start an activity?
Yes, okay. So we often find, you know, we've spoken a lot, haven't we, about how to get started, how to kind of activate that motivation. But then sometimes people say, well, once I'm hyper-focused, I can't actually stop. I can't break that. And often, you know, I'm not even taking a moment to eat or to go to the toilet or wherever it might be. And there's that fear, isn't there, that if we don't stop, what if we can't start that thing again? So I've written down a few kind of tips based on what people have said to us that they find useful. So again, it's that idea that if it was a case of willpower or kind of trying harder, we could just stop. So we sometimes need external cues to break us out of that hyper-focus. So again, that time boxing, if we set a period of time that we're going to do that thing for, and then kind of an alarm will break us out of that. But a useful thing also is if we fear we won't be able to start again, it's stopping at a point when we know what we're going to do next. So if you're doing an essay, I don't know, or a project around the home, you know these are the next 2 steps that I'm going to do, and then you can just pick that up the next day, so it feels less anxiety kind of inducing to stop. We can force breaks. We said, haven't we, if we don't feel able to kind of do that ourselves, let's force a break by scheduling an appointment or a meeting or a social obligation for a time when we know we're going to stop, because then we have to, because other people are kind of holding us accountable. Movement, I will go on and on and on and on and on about moving your body, because that will activate areas of your brain to kind of refocus you. So getting up from what you're doing, moving in another room can really help with that. And again, those kind of sensory indicators, so switching up the environment, having a different smell, having a different sound can kind of tell you that you're in a different zone and you can stop doing that activity.
Absolutely. Next one is, where can I get support for ADHD? So that's that kind of comorbid autism and ADHD. There's a few, so both in Suffolk and Norfolk, and a lot of GPs, there is something called a social prescriber, so they'll be able to kind of offer some information around this and do some signposting. So recommend going to your GP about that. Also, the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, which is what we're under, also has an incredible service called the Recovery College, who offer online workshops and courses. And they have ones around kind of understanding and an introduction to kind of autism and ADHD, and they're free to join, similar to this. So yeah, please go and kind of see our colleagues in that team. There's also services such as Realise Futures, who do drop-in advice and guidance. Also things such as Autism Anglia. If you're based in Norfolk, there's a Norfolk Autism Partnership. But if you're really looking for a diagnosis more so than anything, there are many avenues and routes, and different GPs do that differently. So we'd recommend booking an appointment for your GP, because all of the routes end up having to go through them anyway. So please do that.
And then next one is, how do I get support for my child? So our service doesn't provide that kind of information. But locally you'll have a SEND local offer, so SEND local offer, so that's information and advice for families, children, young people with special educational needs and disabilities, and neurodevelopmental stuff comes into that as well. So there's the Suffolk local offer, there's a Norfolk local offer, and of course go to your schools. You know, if you're a young person, you know, they'll have a SEN worker, won't they, within that school that you can explore that with.
Absolutely. I've just already touched base on the next one of, how do I access a diagnosis? So in our services with kind of Norfolk and Suffolk Wellbeing Talking Therapies, we do not diagnose, kind of in general, actually, we don't diagnose, but as well, especially including kind of neurodiversity, autism or ADHD. So please go to your GP. There are different routes and avenues. Again, certain GPs do things slightly differently, or certain routes, so you absolutely must go to them.
Next one is, how is ADHD treated? So as with anything, there's usually kind of multiple kind of routes. The recommendation is lifestyle changes, therapy or coaching, and or medication. And usually it's kind of a combination of those things. So, you know, as with anything, just taking medication isn't going to make that long-term change. It's about kind of what you do when you're using that medication. And equally, there's different kind of types of therapy. But it's based on you, personal, isn't it? You know, for you as an individual.
Absolutely. Is ADHD genetic?
Yes, so again, research is kind of limited around this. We know with many conditions there's a genetic component, there's a percentage of ADHD that we say is heritable, but it varies in terms of that percentage and how much we know at the moment. But the answer, I suppose, the short answer is yes, there is a genetic element. But as with anything, it's very complex. There's not just kind of one gene involved, and it's a kind of interplay between our genes and our environment.
Absolutely. And our final one that we used to get quite a lot in our live sessions is RSD, so rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I got it. Part of ADHD. Well, for those of you who don't know what RSD is, it is a strong reaction. It's a way to describe a strong reaction to rejection or criticism, so it can be quite a sensitivity to those sort of areas. Now, we know that it is actually often associated with ADHD and autism. So yes, a lot of people with these can absolutely experience RSD, but actually it can affect people without neurodiversity as well. So yeah, we can argue really it can affect anyone, but yes, it has been proven that it can be closely associated with these two. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're now going to come to the end actually, so a couple of minutes just to go through what else we can offer. We aren't ADHD specialists, so on here I've got a range of kind of helpful resources. You can take a picture now, you can come back to it, of course it's on demand, but if you are looking for more kind of specific support around ADHD, please do reach out to these services.
Lovely, and some further support. So as we've kind of touched on, we've got lots more online workshops, very similar to what you've been watching just now. So there's a relaxation station, there's workshops around low mood, anxiety more generally, sleep workshops, mindfulness workshops, low self-esteem, kind of you name it, there's lots on there. So please do kind of explore the websites and see if you find anything on there that's useful for you.
And what else do we offer? So we also, as a services, do offer one-to-one support. So what you can do is you can either, we'll talk about in a moment, you can do a referral, whether that's online for your GP or on the phone to our service, And that will then you'll have an assessment with someone such as ourselves, a PWP, who will talk to you about what your difficulties are. From that, we'll then build a treatment plan around those difficulties, and that can be for a range of talking therapies, kind of guided self-help, and also kind of CBT and counselling. So please do come. We always want to help anybody, and we can offer that kind of one-to-one support if that's what you feel you may need.
And peer support as well. So we have peer advisors within the services. So these are people with lived experience of having challenges with their mental health, who have kind of come through what we say is recovery, and can now kind of share their experiences, can provide kind of a listening ear to you. And it's such a valuable service, because this is people who have walked the walk, you know, that have been through things that perhaps are similar to you. So it's, yeah, a really powerful service, and it can make us feel really kind of connected to others as well.
Absolutely. As well as kind of all the other things we offer, we've also got an incredible employment support team within our services. So our employment advisors can practically help with any advice and guidance on any barrier or any difficulty at work. So whether that is returning to work after having sickness off, or being off work for whatever reason, being a parent or not feeling able to work, remaining in work. So if we are in work but things aren't going particularly well, so perhaps we need some advice on how to do challenging conversations, what you're entitled to, etc. And it can be about finding rewarding and sustainable work that we want to do as well. They are honestly incredible and an absolute asset to our team. So yeah, please do kind of mention that if you're interested. Oh, I always forget about that animation. Apologies, everyone.
So yeah, as we said, we're here to help. Absolutely, we can provide individual support. You can give us a call to get that support. You can self-refer on the websites that are up on the screen here, both the kind of Norfolk side of the service and the Suffolk side of the service. And as with everything we said here, you can go to your GP or another kind of healthcare professional to make that referral. But just as a reminder, we don't provide any kind of assessment or diagnosis for ADHD. That is through the GP, that process.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for watching. Please do come forward if you ever need any other support. We'd love to kind of work with you. Hopefully you've taken some things away. And if you have managed to watch the whole hour and a bit, please go do some self-care now. Yeah. Put that little time in for you. We really appreciate you all coming. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.